Welcome to the next in the 67 steps, principles of success, a new way to look at life, new habits that you're forming over these 2 months or so that you're going through this. Remember, this is the science. Average person takes about 66, 67 days to instill new habits. So what habit are we talking about today? I call this ignoring the 99 and the 1/10th rule. Okay? This is a counterintuitive approach that you have to adopt. Now, let me make it clear. Ignoring the 99 is principle A. B is the 1/10th rule. So let's talk about those step by step. Ignoring the 99, there's so many key pieces of advice that I got from smart people that I'm very thankful for, because I don't know what would have happened to me had these people not taken the time and effort and energy to pass on what they had learned, smarts, judgment, ideas, wisdom that they learned. And it's part of what inspired me now to do this 67 steps. I wanted to pass on what they showed me. And one of the things Alan Nation told me, he said, Ty, the secret to life is ignoring 99 out of 100 people. But when you find that one person, do everything they say. It's a very counterintuitive approach, because what's natural for us, for our brains, is to be democratic. So you have 10 friends and you ask, piece of advice like, should I quit my job? Should I do this business? Should I divorce this person? Or should I, stop dating this person? Or should I marry this person? And what we do is we take little tidbits, it's like, oh, okay, this person, okay, well, I'll listen and I'll factor it in. And we really overestimate our brain's ability to judge and juggle the ideas. So what Alan Nation said was completely counterintuitive to that. He was saying, do not ask 99 out of 100 people. Find the one person who has expertise, insight, and knowledge into that area. And when you realize, and maybe you test them, and you test their advice, and as it works for you, you continue on the path over and over again. You test them again, test them again. But once they stand that test of time, then you begin to listen more and more and more, to the point where it seems like you're doing everything they say. And when it comes to books, I recommend this. Most people, how do they read? They go, their friend says, oh, read this book and that book. Or they go to Barnes & Noble and they see the marketing and they see the book. Oh, buy that one. What I suggest, and it's why on my site here, click the links, the books link, and you'll see I'm trying to narrow it down from 130 million books that have been published at one time or another, down to 150. Those represent that small percentage of the masses of books and knowledge out there that you should focus on. Obviously, it's not one book. There is no one book that you want to get all your information, because life's multifaceted. You need, there's, in the modern world, if you've heard my TED Talk, I talk about, like what my grandpa said. He's like, Ty, there is no one person wise enough to completely give you the answers to all things in life. Stephen Hawking, the great physicist, maybe the smartest person alive or of all time, the Newton head, this absolutely amazing mind. He says, I don't understand women. That's what he says. After all these years, I still don't understand women. So he has expertise on the universe and space and time, but social things, he's not sure. And that makes sense. He's been he's handicapped. He's been in like his world of science. He hasn't had the time and the experience and know-how to necessarily go out and, really perfect, research, be mentored on those things that make people powerful socially. So I'm not suggesting literally one person be your mentor. What I am suggesting is that the ratio gets more in line with this one out of 100. I don't think it's, for every book you see at Barnes & Noble, you literally should ignore, for sure, when it comes to books, you should definitely ignore almost all of them. But when you find that one book, you read it over and over and over. For me, Will Durant is one of those people. 16 years old, my grandpa sent me his set, Will Durant, volumes, the story of his civilization, 9 or 10 volumes, 10,000 pages. And I have, over the years, just gone back and read that same thing over and over and over. And I'm not dumber for it. I'm smarter for it. You see, I become dumber when I democratize. Life's short. Your time and energy is limited. Your memory is limited. Why would you... I tell this story before. I'm sure you've heard it. I gave this talk recently at the LA Convention Center. 500-600 people there. And I said, and mostly entrepreneurs, I said, how many people have read the book, I don't know, Lean Startup or 4-Hour Work Week or one of these, modern books on business? And the whole place raised their hand, basically. And I said, how many people read this book? And I held up Sam Walton's $5 little used book that I bought, Made in America. One person raised his hand, and he's in my book club, so he didn't count. And I said, this man made $160 billion. Even now, his wealth, he's dead. His 4 kids or 3 kids are still on top of the Forbes list from what he did decades ago. So, why would we have read these other books? Why are we democratizing our brain? Why are we so egalitarian? We shouldn't be. If there's ever a time for you to be elitist, okay, that word generally has negative connotations, but everything that could be negative at times is positive, right? Killing, it's a negative connotation. But what if someone, drug addict, breaks into your house in the middle of the night and going to kill your children or your family? You might have to kill them first. You see, in the connotation there, thesis, doing good, doing nonviolence, always has its antithesis or antithesis, right? So every extreme has its other extreme. So elitism is a negative word. Generally, you don't want to walk around and look down on others. It's not about looking down on people. It's playing the right hand of cards, as we've talked about. You got to play the right hand. You could listen to this person. You could listen to that person. One has spent 20 or 30 years trying to get to know this subject. Another person is just a novice who read one magazine article about starting a business. Why would you listen to that person? They might be right, but the odds are low. And at the end of the day, you have to play the right hand. Sometimes you'll lose that way, but you'll win more often than not. You must be elitist when it comes to who you let into your brain. I recently bought I'm an investor. I buy businesses, sometimes start them now. I used to start them, and now I buy them sometimes. And bought a business, solid business. But I realized some of the employees in there, the owners were listening to employees that shouldn't be listened to. These are employees who are employees because they're just learning. They're not that skilled, yet they were influencing the decision of the owners. And I came in and I said, look, we're going to have to be elitist. Not in a negative way, not in a condescending way, but in a realistic way. We could take the business to the right or we could take it to the left. What do the people who know what they're doing say? Who have a track record that we can bank on? Even though the experts are sometimes wrong. Look at the story of long-term capital management, one of the top hedge funds in history. All these PhDs and smart people came together and bet on the stock market, options, and hedged this, that, and they were wrong, and they almost crashed the U.S. Economy. The government had to step in. So sometimes experts can be wrong, but still, who you going to entrust brain surgery to? Your buddy who knows a few, herbs, herbal remedies, or a doctor who's done 1,000 brain surgeries over the last 30 years? Both, you could end up dead both ways, but the odds are better. So you got to be elitist in that situation. So I want you to start becoming pickier, is really what I'm saying. I have some friends, one of my best friends, I don't look down on him at all. He's a great friend. We've been friends since 14 years old, middle school. What I do, I just never ask him questions about business. He's a great guy, has many skills, doesn't know much about business and making money. He's always broke. So I just never bring up the subject with him. So I don't want to get in that position where I even have to choose. Never, ever. And you might have to do that. People should earn your trust when it comes to listening to them. So they have to earn your trust, okay? It's not always, it feels a little uncomfortable at sometimes, because that's why I just said, I put it out in the open here about being elitist about your time. You know, Seneca says in the book on the shortness of life, he speaks on how when it comes to money, you're frugal, right? If you're walking down the street and you drop a $50 bill, you're going to go back and pick it up, even if you have to walk back 10 minutes to get it, because it's $50. But when you think about your time, your future, your goals, you could see times where you're just like throwing it all out there, like, oh yeah, I got all the time in the world. And that's what Seneca says. You don't have all the time in the world. And you don't have time to listen to people that are going to lead you astray. Even if they're not. And the hardest part is that they're not necessarily trying to. Right? They might be your friend. And generally, it's friends and family that I'm specifically talking about. It could be colleagues. It could even be a business partner. So, which brings me to the second part of this step, which is the 10% rule. What I mean by that is you will probably only do 10% of the success of whoever you listen to, whoever you copy, whoever you emulate, whoever you mentor under. So what's that mean? Well, that's a scary thing to think about, because, for example, my brother Ben, he finally got on the bandwagon with me and wanted to learn how to play basketball. So I said, we have another friend who's pretty good at basketball, and he was going to spend time and learn from this guy who's pretty good. And I said, Ben, why don't you go straight to the top? Remember the 10% rule. You got to go straight to the top. And sure enough, Ben listened. He started studying YouTube videos of Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan, all the greatest basketball players, because I told him he knows this 10% rule. Meaning, if you only do 10% as good a job on the basketball court as Michael Jordan did, you're going to be a pretty good basketball player. If you only do 10% as much as is successful in business as Bill Gates or Warren Buffett. People always ask me, Ty, why do you talk about billionaires? I don't want to be a billionaire. Well, it's because of this 10% rule. You will not perfectly, generally not achieve the exact same success of the person that you emulate. They're going to be better at their way. You study Michael Jordan, I'm never going to be as good as Michael Jordan, but I'll tell you what, if I'm 10% as good, pretty darn good. And if I practice under my neighbor and learn from him, who's pretty good, well, if I only do 10% of pretty good, that's pretty bad. And that's what you find in life. People not understanding this 10% rule. People going out, for example, in business. If you're learning from people who, do pretty well in life, they make $200,000 or $300,000 a year. Well, the 10% rule says, if you follow them, you're not going to be as good at business as they are at their career. You're probably only going to make 20, 30, 40, or 50,000. I work a lot, entrepreneur coaching, business, and I see most people get bogged down at about 150 to 100 grand in business. And I see it. They're reading books by people who make $500,000 to $1 million revenue in their business. And I'm going, hey, that's a problem. You're doing 10%, which is the expected ratio. So all you have to do, and you can change this today, is go straight to the top. You want to learn how to understand the universe? Read a Stephen Hawking book. Not that he has all the answers, but who are you going to trust? Your next door neighbor, who knows a thing or two that they read in a pop psychology book, or thinks they understand string theory because they read a Wikipedia? No, with mass media, remember I talk a lot about the negatives of mass media, but there's a lot of positives. I talk about, how we get bombarded in 1991 was the first internet website built or launched, and how it's been more confusing and hectic since then. But I'll tell you, you can use everything for its thesis, antithesis. So the antithesis of the internet being confusing is the internet can bring clarity. Books can bring clarity. YouTube can bring clarity, because now you can go online I did this the other day. I listened to this talk Stephen Hawking did on the nature of reality. He's so far ahead of me or almost any person that I know or rub shoulders with or interact, that even if that, I mean, I was listening to it and you just feel yourself become not as enlightened as Stephen Hawking, but, 1/10. He understands the laws of nature better than I do. And so it's enlightening. And you're going to need to be enlightened to get to the good life. It is not a path that most people achieve. In fact, you never quite achieve it. It's like exercise. You're never in perfect shape, but you move in a direction. And to move in the right direction, you are going to have to become you're really just, it's a philosophical change. That's what's awesome. It's not that hard of a change. It's a philosophical, just like my brother chose to not learn from our next door neighbor or learn from me. He chose to go straight to the top. And sure enough, it's funny. He was learning in other ways, self-teaching, which is often the worst because you're blind leading the blind. He was teaching himself basketball. Then I showed him a few tricks. But then as he really embraced this new philosophy, being picky who he listened to, like Alan Nation said, and going straight to the top and trying to glean 10% into his skills, I would say within 1 month, he doubled his skill level. Not good enough to play pro basketball, not even good enough to play college level, but good enough to have fun. And now it's brought out a new area of exercise and enjoyment in his life. That's that little win for him. You might think that's not much. No, sports aren't important. On a side note, sports are very important to humans. There's a reason we're hardwired, men especially, to love coalitions. Women are more focused on two-person relationships, but certainly both men and women like or don't like sports. But sports, not just watching it, but doing it is one of the best ways to stay healthy because it gives you an incentive to be in a group and play a sport. Many people need that. I need that. I don't do as well at, just go jog a marathon. That's boring to me. I like the interaction. So he's rounded out his life, and a new intangible has been added, which affects his happiness and affects his physical health. And it all came not from putting in 1,000,000 hours, not from even having to grind it out. There's times you'll have to put in 1,000,000 hours and have to grind it out, but this isn't one of those. Philosophical changes are the best because they're the most effortless once you get past the stronghold of your mind, past the cognitive biases. They're relatively easy. They don't take a lot of time. They give big bang for the buck. You almost get overnight results. You just got to get over your stubbornness. And so for you today, the key takeaway with this one's very simple. Very, very simple. There's a couple things you have to understand. One, you're going to have to just be better at controlling the sources of input that come in, because the danger that I've seen people try to do with this, they hear this, they're like, Ty, that makes sense. And they go out there and they try to be around the same people, but go, no, I'm just going to ignore this friend. I hang out with this friend or this family member a lot, but I'm going to ignore them, like Alan Nation said. Well, the hard truth of it is that humans are not very good at ignoring the senses. If I came up to you and you said, Ty, I'm not going to listen to you, and I screamed in your ear, your ears have no choice. They will take in that sense, that stimulus, those those vibrations that ring in your ears. So the takeaway here is that not only do you have to become pickier in who you listen to, but you're going to have to become pickier in who you allow in your space at all. I recommend you go on your bookshelf, throw some books out. I'm not big on book burning, but if you have a horrible book, burn it. If not, give it to somebody else, right? Let someone else suffer through it. But if you have a friend who serves, not that friends are supposed to serve purposes, because I'm a loyal person, I like friends just for who they are, but there's a fine line you have to walk when they become detrimental. When every word out of their mouth leads you down the wrong path. And you'll see this a lot. Remember, humans like to gossip. And there's nothing wrong per se with gossip as long as it's functional. Meaning, I was reading Jay Davies in this book, Riveting says that, or Riveted says that 60 to 70% of gossip is usually true. So gossip serves a purpose. It keeps people honest. They know they can be gossiped about, so they, don't. But you might have a friend. Well, I was going to say the main point is humans talk about other humans 80% of the time. 80% of human conversations about, especially casual, it's about conversation. So maybe you're around somebody that's always talking about people completely irrelevant to you, your health, wealth, love, and happiness. There's nothing there. You got to cut those people out. The rule that I like to use is, how do I feel afterwards? If you go to bed feeling weird after spending time with somebody, you got to make that hard choice. If you haven't heard on my YouTube, I have a good tip there. It's called, I don't know, something about friends. But I talk about how you might have to cut friends out. Okay? And the reason being, it's just going back to this. Not only are they negative, but they also sap your brain, and they keep you from hanging out with those people who can contribute massively to your life. Now, remember, this is not just a cutting. That's one part. You got to slice. You got to cut the cancer out. But it's also about the enemy of the great. This cliche, the enemy of greatness is the good. So there's good people in your life, solid people with good advice, but you don't want a good life. You want a great life. Even though I do call it the good life, I guess there's an irony there, but you want amazing. I tell people when I do talks, I got some live talks coming up if you want to come in person, but 1 to 10, rank your health. 1 to 10, rank your wealth. 1 to 10, rank your love. 1 to 10, rank your fulfillment and happiness. And I'm like, okay, average those 4 numbers together. What do you end up with? And I said, that's your life. That's what's going to go down on the day you die. That's when you're going to be remembered for, and what you're going to remember in those last hours. So if your health is a 3, and your wealth is a 5, and your love is a 7, and your fulfillment is a 2, you're living a 5. Most people are living a 5. A 5 is average. So not only you have to cut out the bad, that's easier to identify. But what about the average? What about the average books that you're reading? Out the door. What about the average relationships that you have? Out the door. What about the average business partners that you have? You may need to cut it off. What about the average mentors or advisors that you're listening to? What about the average YouTube videos you watch? The enemy of greatness in your life is just settling for good. Now, again, I have friends that are not amazing at everything, and there's a place for that. This life is not always striving. You got to have a time when you can settle, and sometimes it's like family. You can't cut them all out just because they're not great. But there are areas in your life where you don't have to settle. Family, you got to sometimes settle a little more. You were dealt a DNA set of cards, but again, if the family's horrible, a person in there, you might have to cut that specific person out. But there's other areas of life where you have much more control. The first one is your sources of information, where you're watching the news, the magazines you're reading, the books, the music, all those things. You can cut them out completely and not hurt anybody's feeling and not break any long-standing friendships and relationships. Those you got to be a little more careful with. But there's no black and white here. You might say, well, Ty, what about this person or that person? There's no absolute. There's a direction I want you to go in. A direction. It doesn't have to be perfection. It does need to be progress. Please, I want you to move on a path towards progress. So here's how I want you to go. I want you to answer these questions. Okay? When it comes to health, this is question number 1. Who are you listening to, or what sources are you listening to that should be ignored, that don't follow that 10% rule, okay, for your physical health sources? Wealth. What have you been reading that's just average? It's not great. Learning from it's not average. Hasn't stood the test of time. It's a bad hand to play. It's a bad slot machine to put the quarter in. The quarter is your time and energy in life. Third, bad sources of knowledge and information and bad relationships, friends, family, romantic. And lastly, ideas about fulfillment and happiness that you've been listening to people, advisors, and they're not worth listening to. Okay? Then, this is really 8 questions. The 4 are the ones that you shouldn't. If you don't want to put their names, put their initials or people or something. Or just mention them casually. Do it on this page here publicly, or not, it's private in this group, and do it on your private journal. And then, what are the 4 people you need to add in? Because you got to add in, like my brother, he got rid of listening to the neighbor, and now listen to Michael Jordan. When it comes to your health, who's a new source of information that is worth listening to, has stood the test of time. That's good probability that they're giving you efficient information. I define the people to listen to not as good, but as efficient, meaning they help you get straight line. Quickest way between 2 points, straight line. You want to get here with your life, you want to get there as straight as you can, without curves and obstacles and mistakes. When it comes to business, who's a good source? Some good news sources that you haven't been listening to. When it comes to friends, family, romance, who you need to learn more social skills from. And when it comes to happiness, intangibles, the big picture of life. So there's 8 questions for you. You got to think this stuff through. As you go through these 67 steps, I want you to think, because the accumulation of knowledge is not as important as the application. This last part of these 67 steps is absolutely vital for you. Okay? So reach me on the private inbox here if you have a question, or email me at Ty Lopez if you have any questions. Reply, read other people's responses. You'll get ideas below the video. It's part of a community now of people all moving towards the same goal. That's important socially. So I will see you on the next 67th step.